I can assure you of one thing, you're going to love today's video. If you want, we're going to do it in a slightly different way, which I think fits your taste better. Because that way, besides having fun as always, you'll be able to improve a little more. How are we going to do it? Well, there'll be key moments in the game where anyone who wants to can pause the video to try to answer the questions I'm going to ask you. That way, when I go over the answers, everything will be much clearer for you. Thank you. The general concept of that position. This way, I'm sure you'll improve your chess skills a lot more. Hey, if you don't want to do this, just watch the video and that's it. You don't have to pause the video, okay? But let's try to approach it as a study session. As always, well, not always, but lately, I'm going to leave the game we're analyzing right down here in the description so that anyone who wants to review it at home can do so, okay? Let's take this side of the black pieces in a Sicilian defense. Look how great this is. When there's a Sicilian defense on the board, we already know one thing. There's going to be a battle, right? The Sicilian defense always leads to a ruthless battle, where usually the white pieces try to castle long, right? And the black pieces try to castle short, creating an all-out battle where white throws everything on the king side to destroy the black king, and black does the same on the queen side. However, this game is quite unusual and none of that happens. Instead, something much better does. All right, let's get to it and skip the chit chat. Let's get to the interesting part. Knight to f3 from white, knight to f6. This is completely normal. This is called the classical Sicilian. There are videos about it on the channel. Then d4, playing the most aggressive and the open variation. There are other slightly more closed variations here, like this one, the Rossolimo variation with bishop to b5. But without a doubt, the one that gives the best fight is the open d4 variation. The main goal of the c5 pawn in the Sicilian defense is exactly to exchange itself for central pawn. So when d4 is played, there's no doubt that it should be exchanged. Knight takes pawn here would be a mistake. Exchanging knight for knight would be a mistake, and let me explain why, friends. Although many of you might think that if we trade knight for knight, they'll have to recapture with the queen, and having a queen in the center of the board, especially at the beginning, isn't a good idea. In this case, it would actually be a very good idea for white. Notice that after the exchanges, white's queen ends up very well centralized and can't be easily chased away. How could we drive her out? Well, there's no piece that can do it. Not even a pawn. At most, you could offer a queen trade, but even then, white could accept. And these two isolated and doubled pawns here would be a real burden, especially in the endgame. So here, without a doubt, this move of knight for knight, even though it looks like a simple knight exchange, would not be favorable for black. Do you get it? Very good. Here the most popular moves are definitely, for example, knight to f6, attacking this pawn, e6, trying to set up a structure later with d5, d6, aiming for a dragon or Scheveningen type setup. Well, there are a lot of possible moves here, but without a doubt, black chooses a pretty tricky defense, which is this one here, e5. This variation is called the Lento variation of the Sicilian defense and has a very important characteristic. Let me explain. Normally, before playing e5, people usually play knight to f6 first, attacking the pawn, and when it is defended, then you play e5. This has a small difference, which you'll see is not so small, and I'm going to show you right now. When you play e5 directly, the knight, logically, in both variations, the best move it has is this knight to b5. Why? Because if black doesn't react correctly now, look at what white can do. Play knight to d6, giving check and capturing this bishop. Without a doubt, here the best thing for black, if they don't want to lose castling rights, is to capture this knight, and then the queen would come in very strongly. Black would be extremely restricted, and without a doubt, this would be much better for white. Therefore, here after this knight to b5, black must play d6, so that now they are defending this pawn with both the queen and the bishop. Therefore, the white knight can no longer jump to the d6 square. Do you see the importance of knowing all these details? The good thing about this video is that you can study it as many times as you want, okay? Very good. So here, normally, with the small difference that these two knights would be developed, you see? For example, A move like a 6 would force white to retreat their knight to a3. Let's rewind a bit to understand the difference now. Here, after this move d6, white, although it's true that they can play knight to c3, and after a6, following the same line, let's say, they have a move that I always use myself whenever someone plays this variation against me with black, and that's c4. I'll explain why I love this move. This move has something very important, and it's the following. If you try to chase my knight away now, I'm just going to put it on c3. And look at these two pawns, both the one on e4 and the one on c4, how they work together to place a fantastic knight on d5, which honestly is painful to look at for black's pieces, because who can kick that knight out? Honestly, no one. And then it's going to be defend you. With this other knight, just in case one knight wants to be traded, the other one can come toward the center. This is the big difference between having developed this knight before or after the c-pawn is free. And black allowed this by not playing knight to f6 first, attacking this pawn. The game continues with bishop e7, and now white plays a move that, well, in my opinion, and I'm talking about personal preference, it's not my favorite. Here, for example, I would prefer to continue with the move bishop to d3, and I'll explain why. Because after this move, for example, if they later play a move like, let's say, a6, I already have time to play knight to c3, and then this knight will come here, and the other one will support it. The idea is that, of course, if we play knight to c3 first, which is what happened in the game, after black plays a6, you see what's happening here, right? This knight has no choice but to go to a 3. I always like to keep the club's 3 square available for as long as possible so I can jump there with my knight and then redirect it here. That way, my knight has to go to a3, and that's what happened to white in the game. And even though it's not a bad position at all, since this knight can be repositioned, in my opinion, it's not as comfortable as the variation I like so much. I'm sure many of you are probably thinking the following. Why did black decide to play this move? Bishop e7 and delay the development of the knight. Do you know why? Well, it's to go straight for the move f5. All right, we're in a structure very similar to the King's Indian, to a King's Indian defense structure, where usually this knight ends up on d4 and will very likely be exchanged for another piece, and this pawn will end up like this. So this is the traditional break in the King's Indian, for all of you who are already familiar with it. If you're a bit more advanced, especially with these kinds of structures, you'll understand what I'm referring to. If not, that's totally fine. There will come a day when you'll study it properly. The idea is that 5 in these kinds of cases is the correct break. So what happens here? Well, if white captures, then bishop takes pawn, and black is left with a wonderful position with both central pawns. The bishop is on a really well-developed square, and white has a very awkward knight here that's far from joining the battle. So after this f5, white doesn't want to capture. What do they prefer? Well, for example, they might play bishop to d3. At this point, black makes a risky decision, but I have to tell you something. How lucky we are that black took such a risky decision, because they gave us a marvelous game that I assure you won't go unnoticed and will become one of your favorite games, without a doubt. Especially for all of you who love attack and play. Look at this! Here, black chose the move f4. Let me explain. At first glance, it might seem like a normal move, right? All of you are probably thinking, come on, chess teacher, this doesn't seem risky to me at all. In fact, it makes perfect sense. I'm getting ready to attack on the king side. You've explained to me yourself in several of your videos that when the pawn chain points in a certain direction, the attack is supposed to go toward that flank, right? But of course, there's something here you have to keep in mind. Now, honestly, all of this would seem perfectly logical if castling had already happened. Wouldn't you agree? Because the king would be completely alone since all the pieces are on the queen side, and then the attack would undoubtedly be totally promising, thanks to the bishops, the queen, and probably the knight, along with this pawn that in some cases can be pushed forward to break through. It would be a lethal attack. But, of course, what's the difference if the white player hasn't castled yet? that they can directly strike at this tip of the pawn chain. And now black has, let's say, a serious problem. Although you'll see that it's not quite like that, black's idea was correct. The idea here is that obviously we don't want to take this pawn because if we do, white would surely recapture on this square, opening the file toward our future kingside castling since we won't castle queenside as it would be too exposed and in fact all of white's heavy pieces are on that flank. So here we'd basically be helping white coordinate their rooks and queens, let's say all their pieces, toward the queenside. Therefore, after this g-brie, we don't want to take the pawn. I hope that's all clear. But do you know what the idea was for the player with the black pieces at this point? Forget about the pawn, and I'm just going to play the simple knight to f6. Yes, yes, giving up the pawn. Take a close look. After the exchanges, which is what happened in the game, pawn takes pawn, and bishop takes pawn, the white pieces have won a pawn. And not only that, they've also developed all their pieces properly. In exchange for what? Well, in exchange for the fact that black has all their pieces perfectly set up to launch an attack. And not only that, but they have an idea that you're gonna love. The game continues with castling. Yeah, that's right. They've given up a pawn, and now instead of attacking, they simply castle. But this is going to be important. Now, black is threatening something very powerful. Something so strong that if white ignores everything and, for example, castles, a move like knight takes pawn would recover the pawn, and with very good prospects. And I'll explain why. This bishop is completely undefended, so we would have a discovered attack. After, for example, knight takes or bishop takes, rook takes bishop would follow. And then, simply, the pawn would be recovered and the white king would be left completely exposed. Therefore, black's advantage would be very strong. If they already have a pretty interesting advantage right now, being a pawn down, just imagine if they get the pawn back. So white wisely decides to retreat the bishop. At this point, I'd like you to pause the video, especially those of you who want to train, to try to understand the plan that the player with the black pieces came up with. It's a very complicated plan to grasp. It's simply a move, okay? You need to find a move, but it's not easy at all. So for all of you who want to think about it, I'll leave it here. For those of you following along with the video, I'm going to reveal the move now. The wonderful move is this one right here, knight to g4. And many of you are probably thinking, come on, chess teacher, the player with the black pieces is going completely crazy, just like you do in your videos. Well, yes, that's right. It does seem like he's going crazy because he's sending a lone knight into the attack. And what would happen in a war, for example, if we sent a single soldier alone onto the enemy battlefield? Well, most likely, right? He's going to end up suffering a lot and will probably end up losing his life, don't you think? But what happens then? The thing is, the black side's battle flank actually has snipers watching this knight from a distance, and the plan is to completely blow up white's position. I'm going to explain exactly what the plan is here for the black pieces. Surely many of you would say, well, just chase the knight away and nothing really happens. The knight has to leave and it all seemed like smoke, just fireworks. But that's not the case at all. This is a very active battle flank. So the idea for black here, and it's a completely lethal idea, okay, is this: blow things up when knight takes on f2. And do you know why? Because here, after the exchanges, black's big idea is also to sacrifice the rook. For what purpose? To eliminate all the defenses, and at this point, it's completely won for the black pieces. But that's not what happened in the game, okay? They didn't drive out the knight. Now, I'm going to explain what actually happened in the game, of course, but I'm showing you what would have happened. If they had driven out the knight, for example, with this check, if the king moves here, for instance, they would lose the queen. Or the knight could come in and it would be mate in 4 moves. And if the king goes this way, then the queen would come in, and either way, the white king would be completely exposed and would definitely lose the game. Let's put things back as they were so I can explain what actually happened. In the game, they didn't drive out the knight because, as you can see, it's extremely dangerous and would end up being lethal. So in the game, they played bishop to e2, a much better response. So now they're attacking the knight with 2 pieces and, well, who knows? Who knows? Maybe now the king will be a little bit safer. The idea is that by moving the bishop, not only are they attacking the knight, but they're also clearing the d file for the queen. And what for? Do you remember the variation I just mentioned where the bishop came to give a check and then the queen came in? Well, the queen entered through this square right here. The g5 square, if white now manages to give a check, on d5, they'll already be covering the queen's entry square. And that's why this move, bishop to e2, is so interesting, to bring the queen in to give check and block black's entry. But you know what? The player with the black pieces had everything under control. I suppose you're already guessing where this is going, but for example, if you want, you can pause the video again to try to figure out what happens next. The game continues like this. Again, knight takes on f2. A brilliant move. If now they capture this knight with bishop takes, the same line as before would happen, losing the game for white. But of course, now we have the juicy in-between move, queen of d5, check, moving the king and most importantly, defending the g5 square. What happens now? Now, white, believing that the danger is past, decides to capture the knight. Mistake, all right? What should white have done? Well, probably here they had two options, right? An interesting option, maybe the best one, let's just call it the only one because it's the best, is to play rook to f1, and when the knight moves away, maybe castle long. And it seems like black's nightmare could still continue with this attack. Yes, but it wouldn't be the same anymore. What happens now? Here, white mistakenly thinks the position is safe, taking out this knight and winning a piece. However, look at what black's pieces do here. Could they capture the bishop right away? Yes. However, they prefer to first place this knight on b4, which you'll see is going to be the real star of the show. And now they're attacking the queen. All right, if I ask you, friends, should this queen keep defending this spot here? Because if not, we already know what kind of attack is coming. Rook takes, the bishop comes in, the queen comes in, and they end up winning the game. So where should white put the queen if they want to keep defending this spot? There's no other square on the whole board except for this one here, the h5 square, right? But then black's plan is as follows. Rook takes bishop anyway, sacrificing the exchange. King takes rook, and obviously now it's true that the plan can't be the same because the square is covered, but it starts with the same move, bishop to h4 check. The king has to move away. Here, everything seems perfect for white because it looks like the attack is over, right? Because the queen can't get in since it's really well covered. So understanding that the piece that's bothering us the most is the queen, what would you all do here? Well, in fact, the correct move here is this one, the simple but deadly g6. And indeed, this move is practically lethal. If they want to keep defending the critical square, they can only go to h6, but that would be a huge mistake because the move bishop to g5 would completely trap the queen. And as you can see, that queen has no escape for white. They might as well resign. Therefore, here there's nothing left but to move the queen. And in this case, the white player placed it on f3. How should you continue? It seems logical. The queen comes in and gives check now that the critical square is no longer covered. The king tries to escape, and now comes a key moment in the game. It seems that the white pieces have managed to escape black's lethal attack. Careful, we need to keep something in mind. If black doesn't manage to checkmate, remember one thing, we're down a rook. In other words, if they survive the attack, they're going to crush us because they have an extra rook. Therefore, we have to be dynamic. We have to go all in. Slow moves won't cut it. And let's see if you can find here the move that determined the attack, allowing the remaining pieces to join black's offensive. You can pause the video. I'm going to reveal the solution right now. The idea is that the move is as follows. Bishop to h3, a brilliant move. What a beautiful move, really, sacrificing the bishop. But in exchange, you gain a tempo and can bring the rook into the attack as well. Without a doubt, this attack with the rook is going to be absolutely lethal. You need to understand one thing. Even though we're down material, look at where white's extra material is. It's trapped on the queen side, doing nothing. Our attack is on the king side. What do I care if they have 25 rooks over here if they can't help with the defense, right? Obviously, you have to accept the bishop sacrifice. If they don't, it's checkmate next move. In other words, the only way to avoid the bishop is blocking with the queen, then it's mate next move. One way or another, they have to capture. So how do we continue? We bring our last piece into the battle on the open file, rook to f8. All right, what does white do now? They have no choice but to block the check because the king can't move. Bishop to f3, so now what? Well, Now it starts to get a bit more complicated because we don't have any more checks. What we do have are some pretty well protected pieces. And look at this. Kun, E3. Why is this move so deadly? Well, it's not a check, but it is a deadly threat, right? For example, it's threatening rook takes bishop with check and then taking the queen. If I take the bishop and then the queen, and even so, I think it would still be mate. So obviously at this point, the white pieces could just resign, right? However, there's no way for them to defend against the capture of his bishop. So here they make the right decision and decide to do the following. If you're going to take my bishop, at least I'll take yours. And at least I'll also move out of the queen's check. So at least it'll just be a bishop exchange. Is that a good evaluation? Yes, because if black decides to capture the bishop here, it would be absolutely nothing more than a draw, since black simply lacks the necessary material to deliver a checkmate, only having enough for a perpetual check. And if instead of the queen they capture the bishop with the rook, be careful because this would be completely losing, since after king to g2, black is saved. There's no way to give check, or actually, there is a way to give check, but there's no way to checkmate. And so white has more than enough material, rook and knight, to win the game. So be careful. If I can't take the bishop, neither with the queen nor with the rook, what should I do? Well, bring the missing piece into the attack. I only have 3 pieces, but all 3 work together perfectly. Together, they end up deciding the game. As you can see, now several threats are being made. Again, rook takes or queen takes is threatened, but now with much more drastic consequences because the knight is helping. However, you really can't come to defend with the queen either because, for example, this checkmate is being threatened, right? So there are a lot of threats here. The player with the white pieces tries to bring in the knight to threaten the queen to see what she'll do with the queen. Of course, going for checkmate right now is impossible because the queen is covering, but yes, queen takes bishop. The king escapes, and here there's only one move, friends. Just one that gives the game to the black pieces. There is only one. Let's see who the absolute genius is that can actually find it. You can pause the video and think for as many minutes as you need. I warn you, it's not some kind of hack, okay? The move is the following. I'm gonna say it. Knight to f2. And white is in serious trouble. Really big trouble. Why? Because there's nothing that can be done to stop the threat of queen takes rook. In fact, now would be checkmate. And how do we defend this rot? There's no way. The only thing white can do is try to escape with the king. But look how the game continues. Queen takes rook, check, and when the king escapes, simply queen takes the other rook, and I take both rooks. And it's just going to keep going like that. Queen takes pawn, check. I'm going to take this knight. You don't have any checks to get active. So here, without a doubt, the advantage is so overwhelming that the player with the white pieces, perplexed, decided to resign the game. Don't tell me you didn't really enjoy this game today. You'll probably watch it more than once because honestly, it gives you goosebumps. I hope you loved it. Let me know in the comments. I'm going to read all of them if you like this video format, because if you do, I'm going to make more videos like this. The idea is for all of us to study together, of course. Leave a big like, as I always say, if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos like this, and we'll see each other tomorrow, as always, if you're a subscriber to the channel, in the next video, friends. Goodbye.